So you want to think like a historian. Well, maybe you don't know that yet, but I promise you should. This is my second video in a series on how to think like a historian, in which I introduce you to the tools and skills and mindset of the historian's craft. In a previous video, I talked about how to read and dissect and assess secondary books, meaning books that are written by scholars about historical periods. In this video, I'm going to talk about primary sources as opposed to secondary sources, the primary sources that are from the area that we are actually studying and how historians approach those documents. Let's dig in. I once had a friend who made a career of both selling homes and writing history books. And he frequently said that the three most important things in real estate are location, location, location. And the three most important things in historical work is sources, sources, sources. And that is very true because historical work is nothing if it is not based in the archival primary sources of the past. So when I refer to a primary source, I am referring to documents, artifacts, material that is produced by the people you are studying from the era that you are studying. Now, they could come in a variety of different genres. These could be diaries, they could be journals, they could be letters, they could be meeting minutes, they could be a crock pot. It's just any of these material that come from the area and the era that you are studying. Now, there's frequently a misunderstanding of the historian's craft that goes something like this, that the only job of the historian is to get out of the way and let the history speak for itself, to let the stories say what they need to say. But there's a big problem with that because no history, no sources, no record just speaks for itself. It takes interpretation. That past world, that history is lost. All we have are the remnants that we in our modern age have to interpret. Further, those sources that we are inheriting, that we are reading, that we are dissecting are biased and incomplete, which is why it is necessary to have a toolkit at your disposal to know how to dissect them, how to interpret them, how to place them within their context. And a big part of that is learning how to ask questions, because we as scholars are bringing questions to the past, asking those sources to speak to us about a variety of different topics. And I'm going to get to some specific questions in just a bit. Now, this is especially true if you are wanting to capture the lives, the ideas, and the events that are not typically captured in official narratives. If you want to find these people who are often left out, you have to learn how to read between the lines, how to read against the grain, all these different metaphors we use for how to interpret these sources. So your job as a historian is learning how to bring questions from your current day environment to the past. Now, it would be presentist to then allow your modern day setting to determine how you interpret the past. But it is expected that you, as a fallible human being living in a particular context, are going to use that background to ask questions. So in other words, it's okay for our contemporary world to help us learn how to frame our questions of the past, but it should not by any means determine how we come up with those final answers. All right, now let's dig into dissecting sources. Now I'm going to introduce you to a worksheet or a flow chart that I have my students in my Historian's Craft courses do whenever they encounter a document. Now, I say document here because these textual records are often the most famous form of historical records, but they're far from alone. This same set of questions and analysis can be used for material objects, physical artifacts, images, videos, anything that you are dissecting from the past, slightly adjusted, can follow this flowchart. I'm going to introduce you to 3 layers of examination, and each of these layers that become increasingly complex with each step, each feature 3 questions. Now, I typically use this in my historians class to where I assign them a document or an image or an artifact, whether it be a tea kettle, a journal entry, a letter, and then I have them answer all 9 of these total questions, which then helps us build an analysis. So the first round of questions, or reading the lines themselves, are the following. 1, who is the author? Who is behind this document? Now, notably, you're not always going to have answers to these, but trying to ask the question will allow you to get closer to the document itself. So 1, who is the author? 2, who is the audience? Who is it written for? If it's a diary, it just might be written for themselves or future descendants. If it's a letter, it's obviously written to the person they're corresponding with. If it's a presidential address, then it is written for the nation. But you need to know who the audience is, because that's going to frame what that source is trying to do. And then third, what is a setting or prompt? Why was this document, artifact, image created? And in what setting? The where and the when. All of that needs to go in. So this first round of questions is all about the baseline analysis, reading the lines themselves. Then we move to our second stage, which is reading between the lines, trying to get a bit more about what is unsaid in this document and how can we dissect it. So the first question is, what is the author's bias? Why is the author talking about some things and not others? What is the author going to be overlooking? What are they emphasizing? What fits into their world? Second question, what is the document or the source's agenda? What is it trying to accomplish? Sometimes that's explicit, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's implied. So what is the agenda? Third, what is the provenance? Meaning, how did we get this document? How was it preserved? By whom? And what does it tell us that it was preserved? So what is the bias? What is the agenda? What is the provenance? And then that allows us to move on to the third stage, the third set of 3 questions, which is reading beyond the lines, looking at the world around the source. First, how does a document fit into the wider context? What are the broader contextual clues that can help us understand what is going on here? And that's when you need to put that document in conversation with other sources, other ideas, and the broader world and setting. Second, how does the document relate to other sources? Are there other accounts? Are there reactions? Are we able to get a perspective from others around and see where it fits in? So again, broader contextual clues. And third, what's missing from the document? What is it not engaging? And this question, when I have the conversation with my students, often prompts the best discussion, because it allows us to see the limits of the document as well as point us in other directions that we might otherwise assume. So eventually, once you immerse yourself in these primary sources and you go through this process with each individual document, you're able to better see the world you are studying. I remember once reading about a historian, Jill Lepore, who said she was writing a book on 1950s, 1960s America. And in her free time, so besides when she is engulfed in these primary sources, she will be reading novels and newspapers from that era because she wants to be able to live in that world. And I thought that was a wonderful idea, because to be able to write about that era, to make leaps, to make interpretations, you need to be able to think like them. This is an epistemological leap for us that has to, and you can only do when you are taking layered questions to each of these sources. All right, so let's do an example, because that's a lot of broad overviews and suggestions, but let's put those ideas to work. And so I chose one document, a letter that William Phelps, a hymn writer and secretary to Mormon prophets in the 19th century, those of you interested in Mormon history, who I know it's a lot of my followers, our subscribers are interested in. This is a document from William Phelps written to Brigham Young on August 12th, 1861. If you just Google that letter with that date, you'll find that it's transcribed in various places, but it's also available digitized at the LDS Church's archives. So let's take a base level of what the document does, and then we're going to use our 3 sets of 3 questions each to analyze it. First, what is this letter saying? It is reporting to Brigham Young an account of an otherwise uncanonized revelation of Joseph Smith that we don't have other full sources for, that Phelps claims Joseph Smith received during their mission to the quote-unquote Lamanites to Missouri in 1831, that declared that the Mormons would eventually help the Native Americans become white and delightsome by marrying Native American women as wives. Phelps, in this letter, after transcribing what he claims to be this revelation, then claims that he asked Joseph Smith, well, how will we take on these wives? We're already married. And Joseph Smith tells him, well, we will do it the same way that the biblical patriarchs did, i.e. polygamy. This letter has been used to argue that Joseph Smith was teaching polygamy as early as 1831. But there are some problems with that claim. So, all right, let's take through, this takes the matrix of the three levels. The first level of reading the lines. Who's the author? It's Phelps. And we know this not just because the name's on it, but the handwriting matches. Who's the audience? Brigham Young. But a step further, it's written to church historians because the setting is he's providing history to the church historian's office, shoring up a particular idea. So that's what's going to take us to the second scaffolding of questions. What's the author's bias? Well, William Phelps is trying to reaffirm his own understanding of history, his own place in the historical narrative, and specifically trying to defend the idea of polygamy. So what's his agenda? He's trying to push the origins of polygamy back further than the Nauvoo period and saying that it's practiced as early as 1831 when Joseph Smith is working on the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. What's the provenance? This letter is kept in the church historian's offices as a justification for pushing back Joseph Smith practicing polygamy. Now, as I mentioned in other videos, there is plenty of evidence of Joseph Smith practicing polygamy in Nauvoo, but now they're trying to push it back further into Missouri because that would strengthen their claims. Then there's the third level. What's the context? Well, it fits 1860s Mormonism a lot better than the 1830s. The way he talks about sealing, the way he talks about race was actually more conversant with the Mormon views of races and sealings in the 1860s than it does 1831. How does this document relate to other documents? Well, we can compare it to other 1831 documents, including the letters from Ezra Booth. Ezra Booth was an early Mormon dissenter who writes a series of exposés, and he actually references this alleged revelation that Joseph Smith had concerning the Native Americans. But what's notable is that in Ezra Booth's account, he does not connect it to polygamy. So now we're comparing this William Phelps letter, written 30 years after the alleged episode took place, to an 1831 document, and you can tell what's missing. So what's missing is the actual evidence from 1831. So this is why most scholars now regard William Phelps's letter as manufacturing evidence for polygamy in 1831. So that shows the complexities of trying to dissect these sources and why it's important to work through these steps. Also, I'll very quickly add that this is an example of how there are other sources that historians use to talk about Joseph Smith and polygamy that do pass through these steps much better than William Phelps's letter, which is why historians universally among the academic world agree that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, because we can see where some documents fall short, like this William Phelps letter, compared to others that fit the context, relate to the broader documents from the contemporary record, and are able to support the understanding we have of the era as based in primary and contemporary records. All right, so now you know how to dissect primary sources. Where are you going to find them? Well, primary sources, the physical copies, are typically held in archival collections. Now, there are a variety of different types of archival collections. There are public archival collections that are provided by governments and states, whether this be state historical societies or state archives. There are academic archival institutions like universities. There are private archival collections like the LDS Church's archive, where William Phelps's letter is stored, as well as personal individual collections that people house in their homes or their attics. Each of those different institutions have different goals, have different rules, have different expectations, and you have to learn how to work within them. They also, many of them have online digital catalogs that allow you to recognize what sources they have available, what sources you can engage, and hopefully find archival records that you might not have been aware of. Archivists are so crucial to the historical craft. They know those sources far better than historians do often. This is why it's so annoying when sometimes historians say, I found X document in the archives, when in reality, archivists knew it was there. It's just historians hadn't been willing to engage them before. Now, besides going to those physical archives, there's a number of other types of primary source collections you can find. You can find online with an increasingly digitized version of sources. You can find newspapers, historical newspapers. Google Books has lots of old books that the copyright has expired, as well as pamphlets. Archive.org has a lot of both print and manuscript sources. There are tons. Maybe I'll do a video at some point of some of the best online repositories for understanding history, including Mormon history, religious history, political history. There is so much there that enable people to access from their computers. So I'll note, nothing will ever replace going in the physical archives, spending days, weeks, months at a time digging in. I was very privileged. And the fall of 2023 was my most recent sabbatical from teaching that enabled me to spend 6 straight months every day in the archives working on the sources related to my current book on religion and the abolitionist movement. And it was, I promise, it was only near the end of those 6 months that I was finally able to see how that world operated, because that took becoming immersed in those sources. By the way, another good starting point to find primary sources that might be related to your topic is looking in your secondary books and seeing what it's cited and allowing that to be the starting point, the launching pad for your own research. Anyways, that is my episode on dissecting primary sources. I hope it made sense. Let me know what I missed. I will be doing at least one more entry into How to Think Like a Historian series. If you haven't yet, please go watch my previous video on how to dissect secondary sources, because history, again, has never been more relevant today. So these historical tools are all the more significant.